You planted it. It bloomed. It came back the next spring looking half dead, or it didn't come back at all. You spent the afternoon out there doing it right. You dug the hole. You watered it in. Your knees paid for it the next morning, and you didn't complain, because that's what we do for a garden we love. And then summer came and went, and that spot in the bed was empty, or worse, some sad limping version of the plant you bought was struggling to survive. If that has happened to you more than once, I need you to hear this. It was never your fault, and it was never your gardening skill. Welcome back to Endless Gardening, the channel that tells you the truth mainstream gardening never will. Garden center lies, bad advice, money-saving secrets, all exposed here every week so you grow more with less strain. Real results without the real estate. Today's video might be the most important one we've made about perennials. Here's what's coming. 11 perennials that genuinely return year after year for a decade, 2 decades, one of them over 50 years, with almost zero ongoing effort once established. But first, a mistake so common that gardeners with 30 years of experience still fall into it every June. It has killed more daylilies, coneflowers, and sedum than drought, disease, and rabbits combined. By the end of this video, you'll never make it again. And stick around for plant number 11, because it has a planting rule so specific that getting it wrong means the plant may never bloom. Not this year, not ever. Most channels won't even mention it. We will. Before we get into it, hit that subscribe button and tap the bell, and make sure you select all notifications. Not sometimes. Every single time we post, you want to be the first to know, because we cover the mistakes nobody else is willing to talk about, and missing one could cost you an entire season of work. Let's talk about the June mistake, because once you understand it, every plant on this list makes sense. Here it is, plain and simple. We treat a newly planted perennial like it's already an established perennial. That's the whole mistake. Daylilies, coneflowers, sedum, they earn their reputation for toughness only after one full season in the ground, sometimes 2. During that first June, these plants are not yet drought tolerant, no matter what the tag says. Their roots haven't reached deep enough to find water during the hot, dry stretches that hit every summer. They look settled. They are not. The second we treat them like the bulletproof plants they'll become next year, we lose them. Every gardener watching this has lost a plant to the June mistake without knowing it. That stops today. Plant number 1 is the daylily, hemerocallis, nicknamed tough as nails, because a mature plant survives almost anything you throw at it. Strap-like green foliage, tall stalks, trumpet blooms in nearly every color except true blue. Each flower lasts one day, but a mature clump produces dozens across many weeks. Here's a number that should stop you. A single established daylily produces flowers reliably for 20 to 30 years from one planting. Here's how the June mistake destroys them. You see mature clumps thriving next door with zero watering. You plant your own in May, June's first real heat hits, and your new daylily wilts dramatically. You assume it's normal since the established plants aren't wilting, so you don't water. That plant either dies or limps through summer too weak to build next year's root system. Here's the fix. Water any newly planted daylily deeply, once or twice a week, through the entire first summer. Deep watering means a slow soak 6 to 8 inches down, not a quick surface sprinkle. After that first summer, the roots reach deep enough to handle drought on their own, and from year 2 forward this plant genuinely earns its name. Full sun for best blooms, tolerates part shade, any reasonable soil, hardy zones 3 through 9. A starter plant costs $6 to $12 and pays you back with flowers for 20 years. Get it past that first summer, and you'll never think about it again except to enjoy it. But daylilies aren't even the plant where this mistake hits hardest. That's coming up in a few minutes, and it's going to change how you think about every drought-tolerant tag you've ever read at a garden center. Plant number 2 is the coneflower, Echinacea purpurea, the American prairie native that thrives in poor rocky soil, drought, and blazing afternoon sun once established. A coppery orange cone surrounded by reflexed petals in electric pink, magenta, white, or coral. Tough, bristly stems that never need staking, blooming from early summer through first frost. Mature plants are nearly indestructible. Here's the June mistake. Coneflower is marketed everywhere as drought-tolerant, and that's genuinely earned, but only after one full season building a deep taproot. A coneflower planted in May has no deep root system yet. It's surviving on shallow moisture around the hole. You read drought-tolerant and assume it applies immediately. It doesn't. A newly planted coneflower that dries out in a June heat wave will die before August. Here's the fix, and it's a little different than you'd expect. Coneflowers actually prefer to dry out slightly between waterings, even in year 1. Check the soil 2 inches down every 3 to 4 days. Dry, water deeply. Still moist, wait 2 more days. This trains the root system to reach downward, which builds the deep taproot that makes the plant bulletproof from year 2 on, when it wants no supplemental water except in extreme drought. Full sun, well-drained soil, prefers poor rocky sandy ground over rich loam, hardy zones 3 through 9. A starter plant runs $5 to $10 and rewards you for 10 to 15 years. Now let me ask you something, because I want to hear it in the comments. Which perennial on this list have you already lost without realizing the June mistake was the reason? Every one of us has a story. Tell me yours below, because I promise you are not alone, and I read every single comment. Plant number 3 is Black-Eyed Susan, Rudbeckia fulgida, the cheerful golden daisy that's become one of the most reliable returning perennials in American backyards. Golden petals, dark chocolate brown centers, an extended bloom season from midsummer through fall. Spreading clumps 2 to 3 feet tall, self-seeding modestly into naturalistic colonies over a few seasons. No work from you. Here's the June mistake, and it's an emotional trap as much as a watering one. Established black-eyed Susans are so abundant that we expect a brand new plant to bloom just as heavily its first year. It won't. A new plant in its first June is pouring all its energy into roots, not flowers. Fertilize it to push blooms, or cut it back to tidy it up, and you interrupt the exact root development it desperately needs. So here's what to do instead. Resist the urge to fertilize a newly planted black-eyed Susan its first year. Don't deadhead it aggressively. Let it put its energy into roots, not flowers. Water deeply once a week that first summer, then walk away and let it work. By year 2, you'll get triple the flower count of year 1. By year 3, it's a full mature performer that returns every single year without you lifting a finger. Full sun, average garden soil. Hardy zones 3 through 9. A starter plant costs $5 to $9 and produces flowers for 10 to 12 years once it's past establishment. Plant number 4 is Sedum, also called stonecrop, Sedum spectabile, and its many cultivars, and I want you to pay close attention to this one, because it demonstrates the June mistake more clearly than any other plant on this entire list. Thick, fleshy gray-green leaves on sturdy, upright stems, topped in late summer, with substantial flat clusters of pink or rose flowers that late-season bees and butterflies absolutely swarm. Mature established sedum is essentially drought-proof, pest-proof, and maintenance-free for decades. Here's where it gets interesting. Sedum is a succulent. It stores water in those thick leaves. Every gardening website out there describes it as drought-tolerant. So the natural assumption is that a newly planted sedum needs almost no water at all, even in its first summer. That assumption is exactly backwards, and it kills more sedum than anything else. A newly planted sedum needs consistent moisture for its first 6 to 8 weeks in the ground. Those succulent leaves aren't pulling water from a deep root system yet, because there isn't one. They're pulling from the shallow planting hole, and when that dries out during first June heat, the plant collapses. So here's the counterintuitive fix. Water your newly planted sedum more carefully than your other perennials during its first 8 weeks. Deep watering once a week through June and early July. After that initial establishment period, gradually pull back. By the end of the first summer, it should be on its own with zero supplemental water. From year 2 forward, never water sedum again except in extreme drought, and it becomes one of the most drought-proof plants in your entire garden, but only because you got it through that first vulnerable summer the right way. Full sun, well-drained soil, Avoid heavy clay or constantly wet ground. Hardy zones 3 through 10. A starter plant costs $5 to $8 and delivers dramatic late summer color for 15 to 20 years. Plant number 5 is Russian sage, Perovskia atroplicifolia, the airy silvery blue Mediterranean-looking perennial that has become a favorite for low-maintenance landscape design across the country. It forms an upright shrub-like clump 3 to 4 feet tall, silvery green aromatic foliage, tall spikes of lavender blue flowers from midsummer through fall. Genuinely drought-tolerant, deer-resistant, pest-free once established, and it adds an architectural softness that few other perennials bring to a border. The June mistake on Russian sage is almost psychological. The plant looks tough, looks Mediterranean, looks drought-loving the day you bring it home. That silvery, aromatic foliage signals heat tolerance immediately. But the plant you bought spent months in greenhouse conditions with constant moisture and shelter from intense sun. You treat it like it's already adapted to your harsh summer the moment you plant it. It is not. The transition from nursery pampering to garden reality takes most of one full summer. Here's the fix. Water deeply twice a week for the first 6 weeks after planting. Then drop to once a week for the rest of that first summer. Then stop watering entirely from year 2 forward, because Russian sage actively dislikes irrigation once established and develops weak floppy growth if you keep watering it like a regular perennial. Full sun, well-drained soil, and it actually prefers poor rocky alkaline ground. Hardy zones 4 through 9. A starter plant costs $8 to $15 and rewards you with silvery foliage and lavender blue blooms for 10 to 15 years from that one small investment. Plant number 6 is Catmint, Nepeta, one of the most consistently recommended low-maintenance plants in modern American gardens. Soft gray-green aromatic foliage in a spreading mounding clump, spikes of small lavender blue flowers from late spring through fall, 1 to 2 feet tall, and 2 to 3 feet wide. It draws bees and butterflies by the dozen and genuinely resists deer and rabbit damage because of its strong herbal scent. Established Catmint asks for essentially nothing from you for 15 years. Here's the mistake. The plant looks like lavender, so we assume it's interchangeable with lavender in how we care for it. It is not. Catmint is far more forgiving of moisture than true lavender, but it still needs careful establishment care that first June. A newly planted catmint that dries out completely during a June heat wave will struggle to bounce back even if you fix your watering afterward. Here's the fix. Water deeply once a week through the first summer. Mulch around the base with 2 to 3 inches of bark or compost to hold soil moisture, and cut down on the temperature spike around the root zone during hot afternoons. From year 2 forward, Catmint needs no supplemental water except during exceptional drought, and that mulch alone provides enough moisture conservation to keep an established plant thriving indefinitely. Full sun, average to lean soil, hardy zones 3 through 8. A starter plant costs $6 to $10 and rewards you with lavender blue color from late spring through fall for 10 to 15 years. Plant number 7 is Hosta, and this is the only plant on our entire list built specifically for deep shade instead of full sun, which makes it a lifesaver if you've got that shady side yard where nothing else wants to grow. Mounds of dramatic foliage in deep green, frosty blue, neon chartreuse, or variegated combinations of cream, gold, and silver. Tall flower spikes of lavender or white trumpet blooms show up in midsummer, though most Hosta lovers value the foliage far more than the flowers. A mature established Hosta lives 20 to 30 years from a single planting. The June mistake on Hosta is genuinely different from everything else on this list. It's not about heat tolerance. It's about watering inconsistency, and here's why it fools even experienced gardeners. Hostas in their first summer need consistent moisture because their root systems are still developing, but we underwater shade plants during dry June stretches because the shaded soil looks moist on the surface. The soil deeper down can be bone dry, while the surface still looks perfectly fine to your eye. A newly planted hosta that experiences root zone drought in June can lose entire leaves and struggle for the rest of the season. Here's the fix. Check soil moisture 6 inches down with your finger every 3 to 4 days through that first June. Don't trust the visual surface check, because shaded soil lies to you. If it's dry down there, water deeply. After the first summer, the deeper root system handles moisture swings on its own, and an established hosta becomes nearly indestructible in the shaded conditions it loves. Part shade to deep shade, hardy zones 3 through 9, which covers essentially every part of the United States and the United Kingdom. A starter plant costs $8 to $15 for common varieties, more for rare cultivars, and each one gives you 20 to 30 years of foliage display. We're past the halfway point now, and I want to pause here because this next stretch of the video covers 3 plants where getting the mistake wrong doesn't just cost you a plant, it costs you years of a garden you were counting on. Before we go there, if this video has already saved you from repeating a mistake you didn't know you were making, do me one favor. Hit subscribe right now, tap that bell, and select all notifications. Every week we're exposing another gardening lie that's been quietly costing you money and plants for years, and I don't want you to miss a single one. Plant number 8 is bee balm, Monarda, the dramatic shaggy-headed perennial that draws hummingbirds, bees, and butterflies in numbers that almost nothing else on this list can match. Upright clumps 2 to 4 feet tall, topped with those distinctive shaggy blooms in brilliant red, pink, magenta, or lavender, depending on the cultivar. It spreads gradually into substantial colonies over a few seasons, and the aromatic foliage is part of the mint family, which means it spreads through underground runners just like mint does. Here's how the June mistake shows up on bee balm, and it's specific to this plant alone. Bee balm actually prefers consistent moisture and dislikes drought, which is the opposite of most of what we've covered so far. We treat it like a tough, drought-tolerant prairie native because we've heard it's reliable and comes back every year. It does come back reliably, but only when its moisture needs are actually met. A newly planted bee balm that dries out during a hot June will develop powdery mildew on stressed foliage, produce weak flowers, and may not come back strongly in year 2 at all. Here's the fix. Water bee balm deeply once or twice a week throughout its first summer, and continue moderate watering during dry spells even after it's established. This is one of the few plants on this entire list that genuinely benefits from consistent moisture forever, not just during that first vulnerable season. The payoff is dramatic late summer color and hummingbird activity that almost nothing else in your garden will provide. Mulch around the plant in early summer to hold soil moisture and reduce that root zone temperature spike. Full sun to part shade, moist to average garden soil, hardy zones 4 through 9. A starter plant costs $7 to $12 and produces flowers for 10 to 15 years. Plant number 9 is perennial salvia, Salvia nemorosa, and related species, one of the most popular landscape plants in American front yard borders today. Tidy compact clumps 2 to 3 feet tall, aromatic gray-green or deep green foliage, dense vertical spikes of intense purple, blue, or violet flowers from late spring through midsummer, with a strong second bloom in late summer if you deadhead the spent flowers correctly. Drought-tolerant, deer-resistant, and pest-free once established. The June mistake here is almost identical to Russian sage, and once you understand the pattern across this whole list, you'll start spotting it everywhere. The plant signals Mediterranean drought tolerance immediately: aromatic foliage, silvery undertones, vertical spikes. All of it reads as drought plant to an experienced eye. But the newly planted salvia from your garden center was raised in greenhouse conditions and has no established root system yet. Treating it like a drought-tolerant Mediterranean perennial in its first June kills it just as fast as it kills Russian sage. Here's the fix. Water deeply once a week throughout the first summer. Stop watering from year 2 forward except during exceptional drought. Cut back the first major flush of blooms in early summer to encourage a strong second bloom in late summer, but only after the plant has had one full season in the ground. Cutting back a newly planted salvia in its first June removes foliage the plant needs for root development, and it will cost you the following year's growth. Full sun, well-drained soil, hardy zones 4 through 8. A starter plant costs $6 to $12 and produces dramatic purple flower spikes for 8 to 12 years. Plant number 10 is Yarrow, Achillea millefolium, and I need you to pay very close attention here, because this is the one plant on the entire list where the June mistake runs in the exact opposite direction of everything else you've just learned. Airy clumps of finely divided fern-like foliage, tall stems topped by large flat clusters of small flowers in yellow, white, pink, salmon, or deep red, depending on the cultivar. 2 to 3 feet tall, with dramatic horizontal flower forms that contrast beautifully against the vertical spikes of Salvia, Russian sage, and Catmint. Here's the twist. Yarrow is so genuinely drought tolerant that the mistake on this plant is overwatering during establishment, not underwatering. A newly planted yarrow that gets too much moisture in its first June develops weak floppy growth, root rot, or both. This plant actually wants moderate stress to develop its deep, extensive root system, and many of us kill it in its first summer by watering it like every other perennial on this list. Here's the fix. Water deeply only when the soil dries out 2 inches below the surface, which typically means every 7 to 10 days during the first summer, not once or twice a week like most of the other plants here. That slight stress between waterings trains the developing root system to reach deep into the soil. From year 2 forward, Yarrow needs 0 supplemental water and actively dislikes irrigation. Understanding this one difference is what separates gardeners who succeed with Yarrow long-term from gardeners who lose it every single time. Full sun, poor to average well-drained soil, and it actually prefers poor rocky sandy ground. Hardy zones 3 through 9. A starter plant costs $5 to $9 and produces flowers for 10 to 15 years. And now, plant number 11, the one I teased at the very start of this video. The peony, Peony lactiflora, the legendary spring-blooming perennial that produces massive, layered, pillowy flowers and outlives almost every other plant in the American garden. Substantial bushy plants 2 to 3 feet tall and equally wide. Deep green, deeply divided foliage, enormous layered flowers in white, pink, coral, or red depending on the cultivar. The blooms last roughly 3 weeks in late spring and early summer, and nothing else in residential horticulture matches them for sheer drama. Here's a number that should stop you cold. Established peonies have been documented returning year after year for over a century from a single original root planting. A century from one planting. Here's how the June mistake shows up on peony, and it's genuinely fascinating because peonies are planted in fall, not spring. The plant spends its first winter building root systems underground, so it faces its first June already partially established. But that June is still critical because the plant hasn't had one full growing season in the ground yet. We assume it's fully established because it survived winter. It has not. Here's the fix. Water deeply once a week throughout the first June and July after a fall planting. Don't expect substantial bloom the first spring after planting, because the plant is still building its root system underground. Real flower performance starts in year 3, not year 1. And do not move the plant once it's in the ground. Peonies deeply dislike root disturbance and can refuse to bloom for years after a relocation. Now here's the detail that trips up more gardeners than anything else on this entire list, and it's the reason I put peony last. The pink eyes on the root crown must be buried no more than 2 inches below the soil surface at planting time. Plant them too deep, and your peony will refuse to bloom for years, sometimes never. This single detail is the most common reason peony plantings fail, and almost nobody explains it clearly. Full sun, deep, rich, well-drained loam. Hardy zones 3 through 8. A bare root division from a specialty peony nursery costs $15 to $35 and produces flowers reliably for 50 years or more. Let's bring it all together. 11 perennials. One mistake to avoid on every single one of them. Daylily, Coneflower, Black-Eyed Susan, Sedum, Russian Sage, Catmint, Hosta, balm, Salvia, Yarrow, and Peony. Every one of them comes back year after year for 10 to 30 years, and in the case of Peony, 50 years or more, all from a single planting. Get them past their first vulnerable June the right way, and the total investment to plant all 11 from quality starter plants runs roughly $75 to $150 depending on cultivars. The garden you get back from that investment will outlast most other things we buy in our retirement years. And here's what I want you to carry with you after this video more than anything else I've said. You have not been failing at gardening for the last 20 years. You have been making the exact same June mistake that the rest of us have been making, the one nobody ever explained to you. The one even the catalog companies conveniently leave out. Now you know. Plant these 11 correctly this season. Water them through their first June the way I just showed you. Walk away from year 2 forward, and finally, after all this time, enjoy your garden instead of working so hard for it. Before you go, here is the bonus tip I promised you, and this one genuinely surprises people. Mark your calendar for the exact date you plant each of these perennials, and set a reminder for 6 weeks later to physically check soil moisture down at root depth, not just glance at the surface. Most of us track when we planted something and then trust our instincts from there. Your instincts are trained on established plants that don't need this kind of attention anymore. A 6-week check-in catches the establishment window precisely when it matters most, and it takes 30 seconds with your finger in the dirt. That one habit alone will save you more perennials than any watering schedule I could give you. Now I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell me which of these 11 perennials you've already lost to the June mistake without realizing it. Because every single one of us has done it at least once, myself included, and I read every comment that comes in. And here's a second question for you, because I know this one is going to stir something up. Do you think garden centers and plant tags leave out establishment care on purpose, because a plant that dies in its first year sells you a replacement next spring? I have my own opinion on that. I want to hear yours. If this video gave you something you can actually use tonight, share it with a gardening friend who needs to see it, because chances are they've made this exact mistake too, and just don't know it yet. And make sure you're subscribed to this channel right now, with the bell tapped and all notifications turned on, because next week we're covering a completely different gardening mistake, and the specific plants it's been quietly destroying in yards just like yours. You will not want to find out about that one after the fact. The garden is yours. Get these 11 plants past their first June the right way, and they will reward you for the rest of your gardening life.